throws his cross. It's a deep one. And it's a goal. On the turn for Harry Kane. It was a wonderful moment for the youngster.
When an unknown 18-year-old scored for Spurs against Shamrock Rovers in the Europa League back in 2011, little did the fans realise what an important role he would play in the club's history.
Harry Kane! Oh, what a goal! One of their own! A Harry Kane! Kane past Van Dijk. Can Harry Kane finish here? Oh, you bet he can! On his 100th appearance for Spurs.
Here's Kane. Goes for it! Oh yes! Oh yes! Harry Kane! That is absolutely sensational!
Fast forward a decade and Harry Kane has a World Cup semi-final and a Champions League final under his belt.
Harry Kane is England's priceless gem! Him and him again! And England strike first!
But where the rise of Harry Kane has been dramatic, so has his decline. Beset by injury, a hamstring tear against Southampton in January was the latest in the litany of problems the Spurs striker has suffered throughout his career.
How long is Harry Kane out for?
I don't know yet. I think maybe later today we have news, but if you ask me just my feeling, I am more on bad news than on good news. That's my feeling.
With Kane's underlying numbers dropping away in recent seasons, in this episode we ask, will we ever see the old Harry Kane again?
I think that the sort of upcoming questionable return to Premier League football is going to be pretty telling because he's had a break that is enforced against his will.
Nathan Clark is an analyst working in media and football.
That may well be what he's needed, and if not, then I'm quite pessimistic about seeing the old Harry Kane again.
To what extent would you say that Harry Kane has declined this season?
This season, probably not a huge amount. If it was just this season, I wouldn't really be worried. But I think it goes back further than that.
Would you say the decline then was precipitous, or has it been more gradual? Is there a point at which you can say here's where that decline starts?
So there have been 5 ankle injuries.
And rather worryingly, Kane has gone down and stayed down here, even though the World Cup's still a long way away. But if there's one man that England don't want injured, it's him.
There's one in particular, which was in March of 2018, which seems to have been the major point. Or rather, that ankle injury and his quick return and the World Cup in 2018.
So let's develop some kind of timeline here. How would you chart the rise and fall of Harry Kane?
So the rise, I guess, from a Spurs perspective at least, is, and it does predate this, but it's him getting a couple of games under Sherwood, then getting more minutes behind Adebayor and Soldado in the Europa League as the third choice forward and scoring hat-tricks and being repeated man of the match, breaking through, and then just pretty much straight from the ground, just being an outstanding forward for several seasons.
Low cross in! Kane! Harry Kane gives Tottenham the lead in his first ever Premier League start for Tottenham.
And then the fall is, well, he's had repeated injuries along the way, and he's often taken like a couple of games to come back from them. But then there is, yes, March 12th against Bournemouth. He went off early with his third ankle injury, a sprain, we believe. Then he came back 2 matches later in order for him to be match fit, in quotation marks, ready to start for England in the World Cup, where he was the Golden Boot winner, but his performances were at least a little off. And he's consistently looked off since then, but it's taken quite a while for that to show up in his output in terms of goals. Since then, he's had 2 further major ankle injuries, ligament injuries.
In terms of the underlying stats here as well, is it very clear that you can chart this fall in terms of his output.
Yeah, pretty much. So if we talk about expected goals per 90, we're looking at almost 0.5 right from the off, rising to 0.6 the next season, rising to 0.7 the season after that, and then rising to the absurd 0.8 expected goals per 90. We're talking about the greatest strikers of all time, including Messi and Ronaldo kind of numbers. And then disappearing 2 games with an ankle injury, coming back and dropping down to 0.4. Now again, the goals continued to come, both open play goals, but more so penalty goals increased around this time, interestingly, which sort of hid things for quite a while. But it's also worth talking about the team, I guess, as well, within that same time frame.
Yeah, because I think there's a curious correlation here that when Kane is good, Spurs are good, and when Kane is less good, Spurs are less good. So which way do you run the causality here?
It's really difficult because for quite a while I was firmly in the camp that there wasn't a major issue with Kane and that the issues were with the team, right? This ankle injury in 2018 coincides with Moussa Dembele also losing fitness around that time of the season. Specifically, he was sort of match fit around January. He was struggling with fitness generally at this stage of his career. I specifically remember that we played away against Juventus and he ran the match and enabled Eriksen, who enabled Kane.
A bit of an admiration for a fellow midfielder, Moussa Dembele, sometimes a bit of an unsung hero for Tottenham, but he's a fabulous footballer.
Yeah, not in recent times. I think everyone respects what he's been doing in the last maybe 6 weeks or 2 months. I think his domination of midfield, I think we always remember him as an attacking midfield player in his early days, but he's managed to change his game, drop deep into midfield, and what is so impressive is how he stays on the ball.
And then a few weeks later we played the reverse leg and he seemed out of it and he never put in another match dominating performance again. The January after that we sold him, and since then we have been a shadow of the club that we were. In terms of personnel, we've replaced him last summer with Ndombele, but he himself has had his major fitness issues and we've developed other issues throughout the team. So essentially, the entire time that Kane has looked unfit, we've also been a poor team, and it's really hard to separate one effect from the other.
So given the timeline we drew up for Kane's time at Spurs, how would you read that same timeline from the perspective of Spurs as a team? Do you think they map quite well?
Yes, but it's quite possible that that's simply coincidental. It's completely possible and reasonable to say if you take an incredibly good striker and then the team around him falls apart, then his expected goals numbers are going to dilapidate. But there's more to that, and there's more to that to the eye. He appears to move less well. He appears to battle less well. He appears slower. He appears slower to turn. He seems maybe even slightly shot shy, which is a crazy thing to say about Harry Kane. I won't rule it out that it's purely the team, but I'm having a hard time accepting it now.
And obviously as well, a change of manager has occurred in Spurs in the last couple of years. We don't need to talk about the Mourinho effect on Spurs here. We've talked about that elsewhere in other episodes, but I would like to hear your thoughts on Mourinho's impact on Kane in particular this season.
Yes, it was interesting because the first game was against West Ham. It was specifically notable that for the first, 20 minutes or so, it looked like he was under instruction to be a pure number 9, to stand on the centre-back's shoulder and make runs in behind and be a poacher in the box, and then that very quickly became the opposite, where he was playing even deeper. This was the sort of focus, or one of the major focuses, of Tom Worville's recent piece for The Athletic, and that stood out for me because I don't think it's Kane choosing to play deeper. I don't think it's Kane rounding out his game, because I think Kane has always had those facets of his game. What I believe we're seeing is that the team as a whole are playing deeper. We're attacking faster. We're attacking into space behind. We're sitting from a deeper position, rather than he's in a team where we are consistently dominating the ball in the final third. So I don't think he's choosing to play as a number 10. I think it's simply that's where the football is being played.
Would you say there's any other factors in the decline and fall of Harry Kane then that's had a bearing on this recent decline?
Generally, as a tactics writer, I'm reluctant to point to those sort of intangible things, but I think Kane is such like an emotive and like records focused, partly because he knows his own quality, but he definitely has an obsession about existing media narratives. I definitely think that when he's told that he's a slow starter in August, he believes it and it affects his performances.
August then, done and dusted.
Yeah, nice to get on the score sheet. Nice to know
what it feels like to score in August. So
when he's told that he can't be the Golden Boot winner, then he becomes obsessive about the Golden Boot, etc., etc. And he has these strong feelings about these narratives, and I think they can get to him both positively and negatively. So if there is a narrative about him being a tap-in merchant, then that might make him afraid of getting on chances in the 6-yard box.
You've already mentioned that so much of this decline is linked to recurring injuries. Could you give us just a rough history of Kane's injuries?
What I failed to put my time into studying is the balance between left and right. I know that he's definitely done both his left and his right ankle multiple times. I think he did his left ankle twice first, back in the 16-17 season, and then it was his right ankle that is now the major issue for him, that's now taken ligamental and structural damage. It's definitely the more recent and right angle injuries that have caused this change in his game, or certainly appears to have done.
And those injuries have just run through his whole career then. Is there any point in which you felt as though he gets worse or better in terms of injuries?
Not really. I mean, elite athletes are going to get a continuous change of injuries, and there is far too much football that is being asked of them. Muscle injuries are an absolute certainty. And Harry Kane is someone who wants to play, or will insist on playing every minute of every game that's available to him. Again, partly because of what we talked about earlier, in terms of goal records, etc. He wants that so badly that he will overplay himself. He will play himself for as much football as there is, and there's too much football. So there's always been injuries with him. But that's eventually got to a place where it appears to have done him some genuine structural damage.
So you'd say there is a link between the sorts of injuries Kane is getting. He's not just unlucky, but you think there's some kind of structural issue underlying these injuries?
It's possible. I mean, I'm not like a physiotherapist, but I think the fact that it's ankles repeatedly, and I think the fact that it's both ankles would suggest something that is either a technical issue with his approach to his game or his general athletic technique. It's notable that he runs in a way where his weight is quite forward over his feet, or it could simply be the nature of his body and his shape and his length and the build of his joints, where these injuries were inevitable if he were to pursue an athletic career. It could be a matter of his shooting technique. It's been pointed out before that he lands quite heavily on his supportive ankle when he shoots. Maybe that's potentially a means of generating power, and there's a price to pay for that.
In instances like these, I think it's easy to point the finger of blame at clubs' medical teams. What's your take on the way that Kane has been dealt with by the staff at Spurs?
It's difficult because, as we talked about earlier, Kane is desperate to play every minute, and it's very hard for a physiotherapist. There's not really an objective way to measure pain, right? You have to say, how does this feel to you? Did that training session feel okay? Do you think you're okay to play a full match next weekend? And Kane is going to be keener than he should be medically. And it's very hard for a physio to say, no, you're not allowed to have healed from this injury by now. And it's even harder for a manager. First, you'd have to get to the stage where a physio is trying to overrule Kane. And then you'd have to get to the stage where the manager is going to side with the physio over Kane. So it's really hard to place the blame on the medical staff because there's really only so much they can do in terms of monitoring the healing.
Are you a fan of Football Today? Why not support the show and sign up to our new Patreon page? You'll get access to bonus episodes, full and unedited interviews, and lots more extra content. To join us, just visit patreon.com and search for Football Today. Now back to today's episode. I want to look back over Kane's career more broadly now. Tell me about your first memories of Kane. What sort of expectations did you have for the trajectory of his career back in the early days?
My first memory of Kane, I remember I might have heard his name a couple of times when he was loaned out to Warren at Millwall, but wasn't really that switched on. I remember him being loaned to Norwich and being excited for that and tuning in to watch a Norwich game where he was played out on the left wing and then went off injured. That was a disappointing loan for him. And then he went to Leicester, which I didn't really follow. That was in the Championship. So really for me, my first memory of Kane was the run of sort of 3 games under Sherwood where I thought, oh, this big blonde lump, he's scoring goals. I remember he had a particularly good performance against Sunderland.
Just as they did at the Stadium of Light in December, Spurs have come from 1 goal down to lead against Sunderland. Again, it was a lovely ball played in and a delicate touch by Harry Kane.
He played as part of a front two and did his sort of thing, again, dropping deep right from the off and sort of mixing up number 10 and number 9 play and being impressed with him sort of against the existing narrative. I don't think he was largely considered a huge prospect by the fans, whereas I think he was considered more highly within the club itself.
How would you describe the early Kane in terms of his playing style in particular?
Well, like I've been saying, there's again this narrative that he started off as an out-and-out number 9 and has developed and rounded out his game. And I don't think that's true at all because, firstly, at youth level, we know that he often played as an outright number 10 for most of his youth career. And I think that was evident in his play right from the off. He was always combining, linking up play, bringing in others. He even had some time at youth level playing in central midfield. So he was always the complete forwards, even when he wasn't at the highest levels right from the off, although he got there pretty quickly. He was always incredibly well-rounded at all aspects of his game.
So how has he changed over the years then? What is it that's different about Kane now than was evident back in the early days?
I don't think a huge amount has changed. He developed some athleticism early off under Pochettino, who obviously famously drills a high level of athleticism from his players. He lost a little bit of sort of baby fat and put on a bit of muscle. And right from the off in late 2014 and then early 2015, he just exploded into this incredible footballer. And yes, he's improved somewhat since then, but in the details, in sort of the subtlety of movement and in his penalty taking, in his first touch. But again, he was a complete forward right from day one. The change that there's been is that he now appears to have slowed down.
So what do you see as his best role in the football team now then, if he's lost that pace?
Well, again, we have to be absolutely certain that he's definitely lost that pace, that it's not just an image of a player with lost pace or an impression of a player who slowed down simply because the team around him have slowed down and are providing less and are asking more of him athletically than he actually has. But I guess you could look at saying, okay, does he want to return to being a number 10? Do you want to partner him with a fast runner? I guess that's what Pochettino did when he moved Lucas into a forward role to play a front two with a diamond. Now, there were massive problems with that diamond, I think more because of the way the midfield functioned and the issues with width and so on, but the idea of playing Kane in front two is an interesting one to me.
You've already mentioned that in his early career he has a number of years where he's sort of in and out of the Spurs team in various guises, or he's off on loan, he goes to Leyton Orient, Millwall, Norwich and Leicester City. I'm interested in how you read this period in light of his wider career.
The loan system has come under a lot of critique, especially did sort of early off under Pochettino. It fails a lot of players, but it certainly worked for Kane. For Kane, it was simply a matter of getting senior game time under his belt. I don't know about the specific managers. Certainly, I wouldn't think of those teams of playing styles that would be sort of conducive to what's good for him. I think it was simply a matter of removing him from the pressures of Premier League football and the expectations for what we had from a forward, getting him to play senior football until he was in his early 20s, at which point he was ready for senior football. I think that Pochettino's decision to move away from that and to prioritise his coaching over experience has been detrimental.
Can we talk about age curves? Do you have any thoughts on age curves?
Just that the earlier you start playing senior football, the earlier you will age. And it works the other way, obviously. If you're playing youth football until you're 23, you're likely to have a few more years on the end of your career as well, or it certainly appears, simply because the body breaks down. It's not that like we're all slow and old by the time that we're 30. It's that the mileage does our bodies in, and the constant knocks and kicks and bits of damage like that, especially in the case of Kane if you're going to pick up a bunch of ankle injuries.
So how would you read Kane's age curve then?
It's complicated to know because, again, if these injuries that he sustained are permanent ones he's not going to recover from, then he's already winding down. Whereas if he just needed this sort of enforced break and if he's likely to bounce back now, then there's more room on the end of his career.
What would you do with Harry Kane if you were managing Spurs right now? Would you try and sell him on for maximum value or hold on and hope the decline slows or maybe even reverses?
So this is the argument that I've been putting forwards that is very upsetting to Spurs fans, of course, because he's more than just a footballer. He's a talisman. He's Mr. Tottenham in a lot of ways. But I think that the perception of him from outside the club is that he's still the best forward in the world or thereabout. Whereas I think if we, again, very soon get a strong idea on whether he's likely to return to full fitness again in the near future, we should weaponize that information against the market. And if there are offers for him that are huge amounts of money, from Man United, from Real Madrid, we should be seriously considering them, simply because he will be overvalued by an outside club and we might be able to invest it and be better off without him. He also has to consider, and he's been public about this recently, he has to consider whether he wants to win trophies and whether or not he can do that at this club.
So how do you see Harry Kane's future closing out?
Well, I mean, that's sort of the question. And again, I do think that we're likely to get some answers in the near future. Obviously, he's unlikely to be instantly playing in a very strong team because there are still holes in the squad. I'm not hugely confident of Mourinho's ability to sort of make things work out immediately, certainly there. But we're going to get some strong answers on whether Kane can return to being the best striker in the world or whether he's simply just a very good striker for several more years.
Nathan Clark is an analyst working in media and football. You can hear him talk about Tottenham on the Extra Inch podcast. This episode was produced by Josh Schneiderweiler. I'm John Mackenzie. Thanks for listening to Football Today. If you enjoy this podcast, why not subscribe to our Patreon and get a raft of bonus material? Or, if you can't spare the cash, why not help us out by sharing an episode with a friend? See you next time.